This is where we need to be quite clear-eyed and realize that it is not, just a one-sided business. The first thing is this whole question of regime change. I mean, people in this country sort of bandy around the term as though it's just a normal option in, the arsenal of international diplomacy. That, oh sure, we could do this, or we could do that, or we could do regime change. Guess what? It is not a normal weapon in the arsenal of diplomacy. It is an extremely grave infraction of the underpinnings of diplomacy, as diplomacy has been practiced ever since the 15th or 16th century amongst nation states. Why should the Iranians sit down and discuss common concerns in Iraq or Afghanistan with us if we are trying to undermine them from inside? It just doesn't make sense. The whole point about diplomacy is that it's a way of doing business with people of whom you may disapprove heartily. We're not talking about entering an alliance with Iran. We're talking about doing business with Iran. I do business in my daily life with all kinds of people. Some of them may be racist, some of them may be bigots, some of them, but you do business with them. And when you get the opportunity and you have a conversation, you discover someone's a racist or a bigot, you maybe try to take a stand or try to understand where they're coming from or whatever, but you don't stop doing business completely just because you disapprove of somebody in your personal life. And you don't in international affairs. Even more important to be able to talk to people you disagree with, because the alternative is war, and war is always bad for people. War is always bad for men, women, and children, especially women and children, and the vulnerable elderly in society. So regime change is a concern that they have about us. And we have to recognize that this is something that our administrations have talked about for a long time. And of course, there's the history of the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953. So when they hear all this stuff about this, Iraq Democracy Support Act and whatever, it's like a reverberation, a return to 1953. Secondly, one of their concerns about our government is the direct military threats that continue to be launched. Every time a political leader of whatever color in this country says that all options are on the table, that is a code word that everybody understands for saying that we are quite prepared to launch a military attack against them, even a nuclear military attack. That is what all options are on the table means. And our country is the only one of the 5 recognized nuclear weapons states that has never taken the pledge not to be the first in any conflict to use nuclear weapons. So they have reason to be worried and anxious and concerned about everything that they see happening in Washington and coming from Washington. And then they have other concerns that we would continue the sanctions and continuing to quarantine them, continuing to try to keep them outside the world economy and the world system in the way that we have. So, like I say, there are very vivid and serious concerns on both sides, but they can be resolved through negotiation. And I think if we take nothing away from the discussion this evening, it should just, what we should take away, if we take nothing else away, is what I mean. What we should take away is just to recall how many avenues there are for opening diplomatic links and opening these important diplomatic negotiations. I talked about Nixon and China and how you could do it bilaterally. You could do it through the United Nations. You could do it through the IAEA. You could do it in any one of a number of forums. You could have the Secretary General of the United Nations or another trusted world leader act as an intermediary in the first instance. Human ingenuity did a tremendous amount of work planning for all kinds of military actions in recent years. So let's put, just like 10% of that human ingenuity into planning for good diplomacy and it would pay off so much more than we can imagine. So the present situation, I'll just come up to how I see the present situation in Washington, D.C. The Bush administration has made some moves in the direction of diplomacy in recent weeks. As Kara mentioned, they sent Bill Burns to Geneva to take part in the P5+1 talks with the Iranian nuclear negotiator. There have in the past been some ambassador-level discussions in Iraq, about Iraq, but they never went to the next level or were continued in any way. And there has been talk recently about the reopening of an American interest section, that's sort of like a junior embassy in Tehran. So all these are really good signs, and we didn't have them a year ago. So the situation, if we're looking at Washington, is already better than it was a year ago. However, I think there is still a battle for the soul of the presidency. I think Secretary of State Gates and Secretary of Defense Gates and Secretary of State Rice are pushing in favor of diplomacy. You can see that in a number of different ways. But we still have the Vice President lurking in the background, in the shadows, which is where he prefers to operate. We don't hear a lot from him these days, and that kind of worries me. He is still hawkish. He seems to have been weakened, but he is still frequently the last man the president talks to at the end of any of these meetings. So he's still there. And meantime, Congress is playing a very bad and hawkish role. And it's that we can really start to affect. We need to, all of us, send the messages to Virgil Good, asking him to withdraw his co-sponsorship from the House concurrent resolution. I don't know if you've done that yet. If you all want an easy way to do this stuff, go to the website of the organization that I'm affiliated with, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and you can just put in your zip code, and they tell you exactly how to send a message to Virgil Good, send a message to Webb, and thank him for the position that he adopted on the Senate resolution of last year. I think that was the counter-proliferation resolution. Oh no, that was the Revolutionary Guards resolution. Yeah, so Webb did well, Warner did not do well. When people do well, we need to thank them. When people do not vote the way we want them to, we need them to hear from us. So finally, I guess I should put in a quick plug for my book. My book is about the whole of US foreign policy after George W. Bush. There's quite a lot in there about the situation that our country finds itself in as a result of the most ill-considered invasion of Iraq, which has changed the international balance of forces in so many ways. You can read all about it in the book. I shan't tell it to you now. But just imagine if, by the time that we have a new president here, we find that our country has launched a war against yet another big country in the Middle East. Where would we be then? So anyway, you can buy the book afterwards, and I'll sign copies of it. Ryan, you coming up? Thanks.